So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This webinar we're doing, informational webinar workshop, is focused on updates to the IPMVP for project performance monitoring. We have some expert presenters here with us. My role is mostly to host an MC and take questions, and we'll get to our presenter bios in just a moment. And a copy of this presentation in slide format, as well as a link to the recording, will be provided to everyone later. So if you have colleagues that were unable to attend live this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, they'll have an opportunity to view that later. So with that, a few housekeeping items. Number one, this is a Zoom meeting format, so we're all live. If you have questions, you can drop them into the chat, and we'll keep an eye on those. And also, if during the presentation or afterwards, you would like to raise your hand and unmute and ask the question live, that's an option as well. If you are not asking a question or not speaking, please do keep your microphone muted, because there's always unexpected background noise that we encounter. And then again, a recording of this training will be provided and posted later for everyone as reference and to share with colleagues. Sorry, a little too quick there. So my name is Dub Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And joining me today, Chris Halpin, who, if you've been part of these webinars before, you've heard Chris speak, and he's really kind of our lead trainer and subject matter expert on all things ESPC. And then today we have a special guest with us, Phil Combs, representing EVO. He's on the IPMVP committee. He's an engineer and practicing with Train these days. So Phil will take a deeper dive into IPMVP when we get to that portion of the webinar. A little background. I've been with the ESC for about 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, almost 30 years public service running the state energy office in Texas. Chris has a very strong deep background in all aspects of ESPC, including serving as an owner's rep, and he's a certified measurement and verification professional. Phil is on EVO's, as you can see, is the technical committee, deeply involved in its establishment and updates. He's going to jump in here in a second, and you'll hear from him. But among his credentials, CEM, CMVP, like Chris, professional measurement verification analyst, and an engineer. So we're happy to have these 2 experts with us today to share their knowledge with you. So a little bit about the Energy Services Coalition. We are a U.S. national nonprofit organization that is composed of a balance of public and private sector stakeholders that are involved in energy savings performance contracting. The idea here is working together to improve the process and to help drive more projects through this mechanism. And we have local chapters all over the country, very active in the states of Colorado, New Mexico, North Carolina, Georgia, et cetera, all on our website. The idea, again, is to help encourage education and collaboration so that projects work better and perform better for the owners and are more seamless to execute from the service provider's perspective. Some of the acronyms, not going to read through each of these, but you'll hear these referred to, a couple of key ones. When we say DOE, Department of Energy, ESCO Energy Services Company, obviously HVAC. We talked about investment grade audits and audit agreements. M&V, if you're on, you know what that means probably, because that's interesting you. Measurement verification. Owner's rep, OR, you'll hear that referred to a lot. So the acronym SOUP, that's just sort of the nature of our business. And I'm going to stop here and let Chris take over, but I will reinforce that this webinar and those that we've done, the Energy Services Coalition has conducted like this webinar, are all part of the U.S. Department of Energy's energy savings performance contracting campaign. So this is all an effort supported through the U.S. Department of Energy, and we are a delivery partner as part of that technical support for that project and that program. So wanted to be clear that we were acknowledging our friends of the Department of Energy for supporting this effort as it moves forward. So Chris, you want to take it over here? Chris, if you're talking, you're muted.
There we go. Unmute.
There we go. There we go.
All right. Thanks. Obviously, my expertise is not in information technology. Thanks, Dub and Phil, for being here. Wanted to thank especially Denny Tanguay from EVO for sending out this invite to the whole EVO list. I see we have people here from abroad, which is great. It's nice. We haven't had any international participants before, but merci, gracias, grazie, kamsamnida, shukran, and kushunum. Hopefully I haven't butchered those too bad. I think I got most of the languages of the people that are here, but thank you for being on, and hopefully you can attend some of these others webinars and trainings we have going forward. So today what we're hoping to cover is sort of an overview of measurement verification in an ESPC project and best practices around that. And a lot of what we've been doing here at the DOE ESPC campaign over the past year and a half is teaching folks from all parts of the industry about best practices in developing a performance contract, executing a performance contract, and then monitoring it throughout the lifetime of the project. So we've already done intros. We'll go through what is ESPC, where were we in the process, sort of a review of the M&V process altogether. Phil's going to do the deep dive into the IPMVP. We have a few case studies of projects that have been done here in the US, some Q&A at the end, and then some resources, closing thoughts, and next step. Next slide, please. So what is ESPC, right? It's been called many different things in many different ways. There's this sort of original definition from DOE. What I like to tell people, having done this for many years, I worked for an ESCO back in the 90s. I had my own owner's rep firm for 20 years, and I'm now just mainly focusing on training and so on. But for me, it's a financial mechanism used to pay for today's facility upgrades with tomorrow's energy savings without tapping your organization's capital budget, right? And done properly, for me, it has the performance of a hedge fund with the risk of a T-bill, right? So sort of low risk, high reward, as long as it's done well using these best practices. And I tell this to people every day. So it's really design build contracting with a focus on guaranteed energy savings. Next slide. So where are we in the process? So the U.S. Department of Energy has basically classified performance contracting over the years, right? They've gone from sort of starting off in the federal arena in the mid 90s with the Super ESPC program, and sort of developed the processes and all these different templates over the years in a 5-phase process, right? There's planning, procurement, the investment grade audit, and contract development phase in phase 3, then the design, construction, and execution of phase 4, and phase 5 is like the performance period. And we've been using this graphic throughout the whole training process over the past year and a half, and basically just put a few extra points in here where M&V comes into place, right? The M&V plan being developed during the investment grade audit, the M&V plan being attached to the contract, which is really where the owner's recourse lies and the ESCO's responsibilities lie. Then during design and construction where the M&V activities happen, and then during the performance period where the annual M&V reports are completed, reviewed, accepted, and the payments are made as things go forward. Next slide. So we'll go through a quick review of the M&V process. And I'm going to apologize up front. This is going to be like drinking from a fire hose, right? There's a lot of information in an hour, but hopefully there'll be stuff for you to go to when you want to review this on your own time or send it to other people. And there will be copies of these slides sent out to everyone after this webinar is completed. Next slide. So this is from a slide deck that we did from last October, just about a year ago now, when reviewing IGAs and project proposals as a workshop that we did for mainly public entities. So basically, we went through and we talked about what the M&V commissioning plans are and how they get developed through the process, pretty much all based on the IPMVP for what we call the MUSH market, municipals, universities, schools, and hospitals. The federal government here in the US has their own set of M&V protocols. It's the FEMP protocols, Federal Energy Management Protocols. And we just talk through it. All of you that are on this pretty much understand what this is. One thing that we've been pushing throughout this whole process is the use of owners' representatives. Again, I did this for 20 years on my own, doing work for the federal government and state and local government, school districts, and so on, and found that it was really helpful to help the owner understand what they were buying and help the ESCOs create a better partner on the other side of the table that really understood how this process goes. And wish we had more people doing this back in the 90s when I was doing this for an ESCO. Next slide. So this is also a slide we took from another deck. So Federal Energy Management, Department of Energy's Federal Energy Management Program formed this Performance Contracting National Resource Center with ESCOs, owners reps, federal agencies, MUSH market agencies all together developed a whole set of template documents. They also created this training certificate series. I was lucky enough to help put that together. It was put out last fall, just about a year ago. They put it online on the whole building design guide website. So when you get these, you'll be able to see that's a live link that will take you to this training certificate series that was really aimed at teaching owners reps what ESPC is and how it all works. But for anybody who's really involved in performance contracting, it's a really great learning tool. And you get PDHs and CEUs if you need them for your architecture, engineering, whatever licenses. So we basically went through this and talked about what a baseline is, what an M&V plan is, what the post-installation M&V report is, which is a really important tool. It's kind of new for a lot of folks, but it's been required by the federal government for 20 years. And then annual M&V during the performance period, right? So again, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but we covered this in a lot of detail. There's a whole module in that series just on M&V. Next slide. And then the benefits of an M&V plan. And Phil's going to go into a lot more of this in detail, but for me, and in this industry, having worked on the ESCO side, the owner side, owner's rep side, having an M&V plan figured out early in the process, just as you're starting to talk about how we're going to develop an investment grade audit, that's when you want to start talking about M&V, right? So the owners get to understand what's going to be required of their staff. The owner's rep's going to be able to provide QA over that. And the ESCO, who are really the experts in this, are going to be able to start working with the folks they need on the owner's side to get all the information together to put together a plan, right? So sort of a co-authored plan. And for us, it's limiting the uncertainty, allocating the risks appropriately among all the parties, identify the operations and maintenance issues, because a lot of people think M&V is just about measuring dollar savings of energy commodities, but it's not, right? It also has to do with operations and maintenance, right? You can save sometimes 25% of what you're saving in energy just in reducing the amount of stuff you've got to fix. Old chillers, which are 35, 40-year-old, they're on their last legs, trying to keep them together with duct tape and baling wire. So there's a lot of things like this we want to make sure get covered in M&V plan. And there's this graphic we have up here, sort of the law of diminishing returns for M&V. It's how much do you want to pay to be able to get the level of certainty that you feel comfortable with, right? And it's sort of this turning multiple knobs to be able to figure out, like getting warranties on new cars or dishwashers or whatever. Am I really willing to pay more to be able to get the level of certainty that I want from this, right? So for us, that's what it really comes down to. Well, can you go back to that slide? Oops, other way. There we go. So there's a bunch of different reports. Yeah, we'll go back to this. So demonstrating the performance to external stakeholders is very important, right? That's one of the things we think is super important about an M&V plan. If you have technical stakeholders or non-technical stakeholders, you can help them understand that this becomes the key to success, the key metric of success in a performance contract. And that then gets interpreted in multiple reports. A commissioning report is the first thing you see around M&V during the construction portion of a performance contract. The post-installation one is really the owner's first opportunity and the ESCO's first opportunity to see, is everything that's been done so far in the process leading to what we believe is going to be a success, right? And a success is you meeting that guarantee, the ESCO meeting the commodity energy savings tied to the dollars that have been attributed to that in the contract, right? Either that year one or as that get escalated throughout the years of performance of the contract. But that year zero report, we call it, is sort of a snapshot right at the end of construction, commissioning just been finished, before the owner accepts the project, making sure that it looks like everything is in order. The ESCO's done like, say, 30 days of trending on the building automation system. Yep, it looks like things are going off when they're supposed to. People are comfortable Monday mornings when they come in, so on and so forth, right? So that report is key for us. And then once you get into the annual, right, the anniversary of the acceptance day is really when the ESCO starts their annual M&V report period. Then every year thereafter, and for like the U.S. federal government, this has to be done for every year of the contract term. For some states here, it has to be done the same way, but some states in the U.S. don't really have rules around that. So we believe it's sort of something that you should manage and agree to with your ESCO based on what you feel makes the most sense. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever makes the most sense for you over time. Next slide. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Phil to go through some of the details of IPMVP. Phil, it's yours.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you and Dub with the intro, and Chris really kind of teeing things up nicely to talk a bit more in detail about IPMVP. So just a quick bit of history. And again, I apologize. I realize we've got a very diverse audience. I know some of you out there, Denny, I saw Christian, you guys could write a book on this. So, I'm hoping there'll be some some people know all of this, and hopefully they'll everybody will find some value. But just a real quick on IPMVP and EVO, or the Efficiency Evaluation Organization. The initial guideline came out around 1994, and as it gained appeal internationally, in 1997, it was renamed the International. I think we got some that's background. Okay. It was renamed in 1997 to the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol. And then as time went on, because it became bigger than just guidelines and protocols, there were administrative things, there were conferences and meetings. That's when the parent company or Efficiency Evaluation Organization, or the nonprofit parent organization, came about to kind of address that, so that the IPMVP subcommittees and groups could focus on various different guidelines. Most common, probably the most popular one, is the core concepts. The current version is March 2022. And so for the following slides, I'm going to go through, there's a lot more detail, but it's a higher level review of the concepts and topics that are in the core concepts. And there are several other guidelines that IPMVP updates and publishes. Got a snapshot of those to the right. And another thing I want to mention, again, some of you that have been doing this for a while probably know this, but in 2022, up to that point, EVO and the Association for Energy Engineers, or AEE, collaborated on the CMVP certification. There are now 2 separate certifications through each of those agencies. The AEE still provides the CMVP, but EVO now provides the Performance Measurement and Verification Analyst and Expert, or PMVA and PMVE certifications, respectively. Next slide. So we'll take a deeper dive, but this is nice just to kind of set things up. There are 4 options covered within IPMVP. I also appreciate Chris mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but the federal version is FEMP. It came about from IPMVP. So you'll see the same things in FEMP. FEMP typically gets into a lot more detail in some cases, is more prescriptive. So, but the two are really complementary. So everything even we cover at a high level as far as options are also, you'll find those in FEMP as well. But the way these, if you want to say divide or line up or categorize, is you have retrofit isolation, which at a high level just means you've got energy conservation measures that are focused on a part of the facility, not the whole facility. And so you're looking at those and you're looking at the energy difference or savings accordingly. Some examples are lighting. It could be building envelope, boiler or HVAC retrofits, water fixture retrofits, things like that are typically you'd look at as retrofit isolation. Whereas the whole facility is these options C and D. And we'll talk in more detail about the difference of those. But in the case of those, you're really looking at rolling all of the different energy conservation measures you could have up into one and assessing and verifying the energy savings based on the facility itself. Next slide. I think this is an awesome slide. If some of you are not familiar with IPMVP or options or approaches to M&V, I think this is a really good resource slide, just to kind of to help navigate, I would say, the decisions about which you would use depending on the ECMs of the project you have. So we'll talk a little bit about them, but starting kind of at the top with option A, retrofit isolation, and I'll real quickly say A and B are retrofit isolation. The biggest difference that it explains here is usually with option A, it's going to be simpler, smaller savings, a simpler ECM, where you're typically only going to verify what's called the key parameter or the one main parameter that impacts your energy savings. And the other things will be typically agreed to and not measured moving forward. Whereas option B, you're going to look at, it says all parameter, but really, and we'll talk some more about this, it'll be all key parameters. And so you want to look at anything, if you think about independent and dependent variables, independent is what goes into the equation, dependence, the energy savings or how the facility runs. You want to be measuring and looking at the inputs or the independent variables that have the biggest impact on the output. So that's where it's a little bit different. The other part about option B is it's typically going to be the measurements are long-term. Option A can be ongoing, but a lot of times, like for lighting, it's typically going to be done. You're going to do measurements in what's called pre-retrofit or baseline, and then post-retrofit right after the ECM is installed. Whereas option B can go for the entire term or be measured for the entire term of the contract. And you can see too, as you look at cost, it's really important. And Chris mentioned earlier and showed that graph where measurement verification, uncertainty, when you look at verifying savings, there's always this balance of the amount of uncertainty that is acceptable or the amount that you want to manage or drive down. But typically, as you drive uncertainty down and as the rigor of the measurement verification increases, so does the cost. So there's always in any project, in any ECM, there is that balancing point that's typically going to be a conversation between the ESCO, an owner's rep, and the client or the owner. And yeah, and we'll talk some more details about these, but I think the key is as you go down, you can see typically the dollars go up because there's more rigor, there's more time involved in the verification. And I would say too, typically the skill set, the subject matter experts that need to be involved is a part of that as well. Next slide. So the next 4 slides are going to be some bullets around each option. And so we'll talk a bit through those, but for option A and the next slide, option B, I'm also going to use lighting as an example because it's a good way to compare between these two options. Lighting is and can be verified through both options. So it's a good opportunity. We can talk to a little bit of, so what's different and why would I pick one versus the other? As we mentioned with option A, it's typically its level of savings is lower. Another way you could say it, the uncertainty is more agreeable between all of the parties. There'd be reasons for that. A lot of times you've got low savings. Again, it gets back to that balance of M&V cost versus uncertainty. One of the things you always want to be careful about, and Chris also in one of his slides talked about typical M&V cost as a part of the project is 1 to 5%. So that's always something you want to be looking at is, hey, we always want to reduce uncertainty as much as we can, but there comes a point where you start to erode the savings. And so anyway, option A is typically where you have ECMs. Lighting and water are good examples that I would also say there's data out there, there's industry data where there is some confidence around what to expect. So the uncertainty of not measuring everything may be, again, more agreeable for those reasons. And then it also allows you to maximize your savings as a function or as a ratio of your M&V cost. Again, able to assume parameters with a level of certainty. And then the last bullet's really important too. In option A, and even in some cases in option B, although ongoing measurements may not be required, there still ought to be some efforts. And back to what Chris covered in the M&V plan, it should be clarified there. But there should be ongoing efforts for any of those ECMs to make sure there is what's called persistence of savings. And typically that can be done for lighting as a good example, as simple as someone, whether it's the owner's rep or it's the ESCO, or it's even the facilities of the owner or the client that's going around and just looking every once in a while, making sure that all of the lighting fixtures are still working. Or if one has to be replaced, making sure that it's replaced like for like, and it's not replaced with, fixtures aren't replaced with something that uses more or less energy that would change your energy savings. So real quick, kind of again, back to, so in a case of lighting, what's going to be pretty typical there is you would, the way a lighting ECM works is the two things that are going to contribute the most to your energy savings from going from what's called the pre-retrofit or existing fixtures to the new ones. And you could say pretty common is fluorescent or incandescent is the existing, and then you're going to change out to an LED fixture because they use less energy. They have less power. And so energy, you say, well, what is that? You'd say, well, or consumption. So they're going to use less power, but then they're going to operate for so many hours a year. So typically lighting energy savings are the number of the fixtures times the power of those fixtures times the hours they operate a year. So in the case of lighting for option A, the most common approach is going to be, you're going to do sampling measurements of the pre and post retrofit fixtures, but there's going to be agreement among everyone about the operation of hours. And that's going to be what's called stipulated or agreed to. So real quick, wanted to say, so that's option A, and water fixtures are the same. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll jump kind of into option B. And continuing with the example of lighting, where he talked about the two key parameters are the power consumption of the fixtures and the operating hours. In the case of option B, you could still do that for lighting, but instead of stipulating or agreeing to the operational hours, now you're going to measure those hours, and you're going to measure those hours ongoing. So someone might say, well, why would I use one versus the other? Well, if you already happen to have either a lighting control system or building management system that actually monitors the lighting hours or the lighting operation, then that might be a good cost-effective way to turn your lighting retrofit into an option B, because you're not going to do a bunch of extra manual measurement of the operating hours. You can go harvest that from your data management system. It's interesting too, in this picture, it shows a PV array, and we'll talk about that in a few slides, but that is another good example of option B. And so for option B, it's typically going to be, again, like option A, we're talking about energy conservation measures where you can isolate the energy consumption versus the whole facility. A lot of times, like we talked about, lighting is another example. If you're very confident that your operational hours will never change, then option A is probably safe, and it's safe to agree to those hours. But on the other hand, if you've got some variability, then that's where you may want to continue to measure, because you'll need to verify what your actual energy savings are. Some other good examples of option B would be chiller plants, and then also I would say HVAC controls or building system controls, where you have multiple what we would call key parameters. Again, ongoing measurement, assuming if you have variable loads, variable hours, that's another reason for ongoing measurement. And it gets back to, we talked about baselines, and we'll talk a minute about routine and non-routine adjustments. But that's another reason for that, is there are assumptions made in the initial calculations of the energy savings. And so by constantly monitoring and measuring those, you can know if any changes happen, and then you can have a discussion with all the stakeholders needed about what to do about that, how to adjust the savings. And the other part, one of the reasons why option B can be more expensive, especially than option A, is that last bullet. Typically, if you're going to have ongoing measurements, you're going to need extra data logging, meters, things like that, so that you can verify and gather that data to verify the savings. Next slide. Okay, so option C, talking about whole facility now versus retrofit isolation. And so there's some things where option C, and there's another slide we'll talk about considerations, but option C can be great in the event that you have multiple ECMs with potential interactive effects. So another way to say that is, you may have several isolation retrofit ECMs, but you find out that the changes in one ECM impact the energy of another ECM. And so being able to measure those individually is going to be pretty challenging. The other part is some of those ECMs can be more complex, and it's going to be really expensive if you look at the ratio of M&V cost to savings. Doing M&V as a retrofit isolation, as an option A or B, may be cost prohibitive. We're rolling those ECMs into the whole facility and do it as an option C. That could make that a more favorable proposition as far as keeping your M&V costs low. And then there's the last bullet too, we mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about some, there are 4 options. Deemed savings or stipulated savings for an ECM doesn't require M&V, and it's not a proper IPMVP option. But the reality is, if any of you have done energy performing contracting projects, occasionally those ECMs come along. It's the right thing to do. It's a great thing. It saves energy. But to do M&V on it just isn't it's going to be cost prohibitive. So the suggestion would be, and that's where option C could be really helpful, is you roll those savings into an option C or whole facility approach. The first bullet there, and we'll get into some other considerations, but not every facility is a good candidate for option C. And so there's some things we want to make sure of. The overall savings we're looking at probably need to be 10% or better of the overall facility consumption. And it's really, if any of you understand signal to noise ratio, it's really that. You just want to make sure that what you're doing in a project as ECMs that effect is going to outweigh other things that could affect the energy consumption of the facility. Otherwise, you're just going to get really odd results, and it's going to be hard to determine, was it the ECMs that caused that, or was it things outside of the scope of the project? Next slide. So along with, what makes a good option C candidate, one of the first things is it's really dependent on getting utility data. So, and I know it's one of these things academically, we're having this conversation. It's like, well, yeah, but if any of you have done option C, there are cases where getting to that utility data can be challenging and difficult. And so it's really important early on to make sure that we're going to have access to that data to be able to do that appropriately. And then another thing is just looking at the facility. Does it have a predictable load profile? Things like office buildings, schools, and even hospitals. Hospitals may be 24/7, but you don't have a varying load on the building, as opposed to something like an event center or an emergency response center. Sometimes those can be very challenging to do option C on, because they're not predictable. You may have a day an event where you have a significant energy use for the facility, and then it may go for days, weeks, and months without any. And then, as we mentioned, again, you want to look at kind of, as an analogy, a signal to noise ratio. You want to make sure that the ECM savings for the project are going to be a substantial amount of the overall consumption of the facility, just so something like option C can be effective. We'll talk a bit But on-site generation can add a twist, option C, and we'll talk about that during the slide on renewables. Next slide. Option D, not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's not very common, and there's reasons for that. Most of the time, all the other options, and a lot of times when you're doing an energy performance contracting project, they are on existing facilities. So you have a baseline, you have history that you can go look at, and you can, along with modeling the energy reduction of the ECMs, you can more easily calibrate based on history to know, I would say, certainty or confidence that the ECMs are going to produce the energy savings you want. In the case of option D, it's really, you don't have any of that. It's either a new facility or it's a facility that has been changed or modified so much that the existing baseline data just doesn't make sense. And a lot of times too, it's not as common for different agencies or clients or stakeholders to want to do an energy performance contracting project on a facility that hasn't been built or has had significant changes. So, and then the other part of it is it requires pretty experienced modeling expertise. So subject matter experts that are good in various energy modeling software, such as some of the more common ones. Some of you are probably, but Energy Plus, eQuest in Canada, DOE or DO2, those are some of the most common ones. So again, it's a bit odd and not common, but it is an option if that particular set of things comes up and it's needed. Next slide. So a couple of slides just on best practices. Again, we talked about, there is no such thing as I've seen this out there too. There is no such thing as an option E within IPMVP. So if there's stipulated or deemed savings, it's a reality, it happens, but a couple of approaches or preferred methods, again, would be to try to roll those smaller ECMs into a larger ECM where some measurement verification can be done, or make sure that all stakeholders agree to that approach. And it's really important that any ECMs like that are a very, very, very small percentage of the overall savings of the project. It's not ideal that you've got a project and the majority of the savings that you're going to claim, deemed or stipulated. A little bit just on, we talked about baseline. And so occasionally there are going to be adjustments that will need to be made. Those fall into two categories, routine and non-routine. Most common for routine would be in option C. And in option C or whole facility, again, you're looking at utility usage, and it's typically going to change based on weather or occupancy. And so you have a regression equation, you use some statistical techniques to model kind of what to predict. But as we all know, whatever I modeled that energy consumption for the facility on to, last year or 2 or 3 years ago, weather, you may get a hotter or cooler summer. So you need to have a way to normalize or adjust for those. And that would be a routine adjustment. Non-routine adjustments would be more of an example of, let's say you put in HVAC controls, you put in schedules and set points in a facility, and for whatever reason, those are overridden constantly. So instead of the equipment shutting off for part of the day, it runs 24/7. So that would be a case where you would need to have a discussion with all the stakeholders, the ESCO, the owner's rep, and then the client, anyone else, and say, hey, look, the building was operated outside of what was the agreed to parameters. So we need to talk about how we're going to handle that. Next slide. Really a good point. So one of the things that can be very beneficial, especially if it's a client or stakeholders that don't have expertise in IPMVP or the options or M&V, is hiring an owner's rep and having an owner's rep. What's probably most important is this is done early in the process. But they can add a lot of value for all of the bullets listed. They can become your subject matter expert just to make sure that the M&V plan, the approach, they can review the reports and make sure that everything is as it should be, so that you're again, the confidence and certainty that you're making your energy savings is there. Next slide. Just a real quick note on renewables. They're becoming more and more popular. Probably the most common are PV systems, battery storage. We also we call them renewable hybrid because there's an argument to be made for things like heat pumps, cogen. Are they truly renewable or not? So, but in most cases, these are going to be an option B approach just because of the complexity. There's also typically multiple, what we call like key parameters that need to be measured. There's typically regression involved and some more complex calculations to verify. Option C, since these are typically would be considered retrofit isolation, they wouldn't be option C. But on the other hand, if you are doing option C on a facility and it has an on-site generation source, PV, could be cogen, could be some other things, it makes things a bit more interesting. You just have, at the end of the day for option C, you're looking for facility consumption. So to get to facility consumption, you have to do the math between what your on-site generation is and what the utility bill says. And so between those two, you're going to be able to come up with what the facility consumption is to do an option C approach. And there is an IPMVP renewables guide. It's the most current one is 2017. So there's a group of us that is working on updating that with some more current applications, and that's forthcoming in the future. Next slide. I think that's it. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
All right. Thanks, Phil. That was a great deep dive into IPMVP and the protocols and how to apply them, right? Which I think is the most important part for me. Otherwise, it's just very complex stuff for most people who don't do it every day, right? Anyway, so I know we're getting close to time. We're about a quarter till now, so we're going to go through the rest of these pretty quickly. Here at the ESPC campaign, Energy Services Coalition has been trying to help DOE collect case studies so we can sort of show other folks who want to do this and are interested in doing this. Here's what goes on in states, cities, school districts, whatever, all over the country, and hopefully internationally as well. So if you have a case study, like if you're an ESCO or you work for a city, town, school district and want to get a little press for the great work that you've done, please submit a case study form here. Again, when you get these slides, you'll see this is a live link. Next slide. So a couple that we have featured here. This is one from Rockingham County Schools in North Carolina, and it's a relatively small school district, but they had a lot of the same issues you see in most older educational buildings. A lot of deferred maintenance, they needed new chillers, new air handling units. They got new LEDs, new controls, a lot of great stuff. And they used IPMVP options A and B for both of these, right? Which I tend to see most of the time for most municipalities, school districts, and so on, unless there's a big detailed retrofit like Phil was discussing going on, that might use option C, but most that I see are A and B. So anyway, this was a good case study. If you want more information, just go to the link there at the upper right-hand side. And it's very representative of a lot of work that gets done in small to medium-sized districts and cities and towns across the country. Next slide. This one, Clark County School District here in Nevada. I'm actually in Las Vegas. I lived in Connecticut for many, many years and moved out here 6-7 years ago. And this school district had been a client of mine on and off for 20 years. And with the previous firm I was with, I helped start this project. And it's the 5th largest school system in the country. 23 million square feet have been addressed in this project, and 205 school campuses. In this case, the previous superintendent wanted to focus on doing a project that was visible to folks. So they're retrofitted all the lighting to LEDs and put in some pretty sophisticated controls, Philips lighting controls. Actually, it's the same lighting controls that are used in the Sphere here in Las Vegas, if any of you have heard of that. So it's pretty cool stuff. Doing all kinds of things of motion activation, daylight harvesting. It's allowed increases in security because of the way this has gotten done, which is super in some of the schools. And they used IPMV option A for all of this, right? Another really cool project. And it's still in construction. The last phase is still in construction. Next slide. All right, so we've gotten through the details of the primary content we wanted to convey to everybody today. Do we have any questions? I don't think I saw any in the chat. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll answer.
If you have a
before you
question,
live.
you can raise your hand or just unmute and speak out. And now's the time to do that. There's something in the chat.
That's from Daniel Ferrante. In your experience, what are the primary motivating factors leading to the implementation of an ESPC, and what percent of attribution would assign to each one? For example, 30% owner wanting reduced operational costs, 30% utility incentive funding available, 20% existing equipment at end of life, 10% reduced maintenance, 10% increased regulatory requirements. Well, Daniel, this is a great and detailed question. It's the kind of questions I used to get from my sons on things. But this actually is very representative of what you see out there in real life every single day. You usually have a whole group of stakeholders at, city, town, school districts, military base, whatever it is that wants to improve the facilities, right? Reinvest in their facilities. And they often don't have a lot of cash laying around to do that. So there's always the need, right? Wanting to reduce operational costs. That 30% you've asked about is always there. That's always one of the biggest driving factors. That the utility incentive funding available, as most of you know, goes up and down depending on program years. I used to work in utility DSM market back in the 90s a lot, and it can be helpful to a project, or it could go away on you in the middle of an execution of a project, right? So the need to replace equipment at end of life, that's also something that's always there. Right? The one thing one of the few benefits we saw out of the pandemic was it pulled off the Band-Aid on the HVAC systems in this country and showed that how bad they really are, especially at schools. So that has really been a focus of a lot of performance contracts, right? But what you're describing here is perfectly representative of what goes on. Sometimes we have one thing that sort of takes the lead, and what you use to basically tell the public, we're going to be paying for this at the end of the day through operating costs over the years of the performance period. It tends to be replacing older equipment that's dying, especially if a lot of it is dying very quickly, like we have here in Las Vegas in the summers. That's when the air conditioning systems tend to go out, right? And you pay 2 or 3 times what you would normally pay to get them replaced, and you don't often get exactly what you need because that's whatever you can pull off the shelf. So I'd say this is a great question. It comes into play in every single project, and every single one of these things can be drivers, but it tends to be maintenance problems, saving money, typically number 2, and then equipment failing, number 3. The other things tend to come in, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That answer your question, Daniel? Okay. Hopefully so. Yes. Thanks. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If there aren't any, I think we can keep moving. And we had these set up, these comment MV questions, but we've only got about 6-7 minutes left, and we have a few more slides to cover. If you have anything else you'd like to ask, sometimes people don't want to ask questions in front of a big crowd. That's fine. I completely understand. My contact information is at the end here, and it's for the 3 of us is at the beginning. So when you get these slides, feel free to just reach out with any kind of questions that you may have. We're more than happy to answer. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. So this is one of the ways we can really help through the ESPC campaign. We do webinars and trainings and that sort of thing. We also do direct technical assistance from folks like myself, who I've been doing this for 40 years and in performance contracting for 30 years. We have Lawrence Berkeley Lab helps. And you see we have a testimonial here from Miracle Wilson at the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority. But we helped, but primarily Lawrence Berkeley Lab helped them with their eProject Express portfolio. which is basically DOE's free online encrypted basically database that you can use to input and upload all of your performance contracting documentation from RFQs, meeting minutes, press releases, M&V reports, IGA documentation, the whole thing. And it all gets uploaded online between you and your ESCO. It can be a real lifesaver. Like when the project developer at the ESCO quits, right, takes his laptop with him, right? Or the head of facilities at whatever city, she wins the lottery and takes off, right? Takes her computer with her. You never know what might happen, right? This thing is really a godsend for both ESCOs and for public agencies. So they really were able to help Miracle at GIFA. We also provide direct technical assistance. I've helped now 2 cities, very big state, on projects that they were working on right now. It kind of sorts through some issues, help them with either internal stakeholder issues or ESCO issues, and help them sort of get the project back on track. So whether you're thinking of starting a performance contract, you're in the middle of one, you're in a performance period and things seem wonky, just reach out, right? You can just click on that link and set up an appointment. We'll get online with you, whether, Teams call, Zoom call, telephone call, whatever you may need, and we can help you with pretty much anything you're thinking about. Next slide. So we have a bunch of events coming up. October is a very active month for here at the campaign, whether it's through ESC. We're doing this ESPC Resilient Model Achieve Operational Resilience next week. This is basically going to be focusing on using ESPs, which has been around for 40 years, almost 50 years in some cases, and how you can use it to improve the resilience of your facilities, whether they be critical facilities or places of refuge, schools, or whatever they might be. The next one we're having on the 16th is an ally in your corner, working with owners reps. This is based primarily on a white paper I did for DOE about 8-9 years ago with Liz Stewart at LBL and a bunch of other stakeholders, and how to really work with owners reps, which again, we think is super helpful to projects. The next one, LBL is going to be hosting on using eProject Express to track and report your ESPC legacy project data, which again, I think that's super, super helpful and ties in really well with IPMVP. And then State of States, we're going to be hosting this and talking about, we have 50 states, 4 or 5 territories. It's done a little differently everywhere, depending on the enabling legislation in each state or territory. We're going to be talking about what it's like to work in different states, for ESCOs, owners, reps, and others. Then lastly, eProject Express to track and store legacy data, M&V data, specifically led by LB&L on November 10th. And then our partners, NAESCO, National Association of Energy Services Companies. We also partnered with National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASIO. NAESCO is going to be having their annual meeting right here in Las Vegas at the Paris, Las Vegas, first week in November. Urge you to attend. They're really great meetings every year. And I'll be there representing ESC on a panel. I'll also be there just talking to folks about ESC and the DOE ESPC campaign. Next. And then resources, right? There's a ton of resources out there. We did a whole training just on resources a few months ago. Of course, DOE Better Buildings program has been around, I think, 12, 15 years now. There's a whole ESPC toolkit. FEMP program has this PC NRC that I talked about earlier with a lot of resources, and their M&V guidelines, this FEMP guidelines that Phil mentioned. Then he also mentioned the IPMVP core concepts. And then this brand new guide just came out less than a year ago, back in January, the Energy Performance Contracting Guide for Facility Owners. Then off here to the right, we have the different certifications. Again, if you're involved in M&V and are not certified, I urge you to get one of these certifications. They're all super helpful. Next slide. All right, and then the ESPC campaign itself, right? DOE set this up really about almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, to support the use of PC to increase efficiency, modernize public buildings, reduce expenses, increase resilience, which is becoming more important every day, and lead by example goals. We're trying to share and leverage practical resources to strengthen ESPC and M&V and amplify and implement best practices. We think that's really, it gets done in a lot of different ways across the US and around the world. We're hoping to take these best practices and really get them into the communities so that everybody comes out with projects that are wins for everybody, right? There's a handful of bad projects out there. That's what people tend to remember, right? Which is unfortunate, but there's hundreds and hundreds of really great projects that get done every single year in this. There's 6 to 7 billion a year gets done in performance contracting. And we want to share it and demonstrate impact, right? With measured and verified savings. Our target is to hit $1 billion worth of M&V savings over the next 4 to 5 years. And we really want to showcase the achievements, both for the public sector folks who work so hard, are doing 4 and 5 jobs each to implement these projects, and their ESCO partners who work really hard. And I know I've worked for one for a long time. I know how hard it is to do successful projects that you can make a fair margin on at the end of the day. And it's not an easy thing to do. So we're trying to, help all sides here, all boats rising together through all these trainings and webinars that we do. So if you're interested in joining, especially our public agency partners, we really would love more public agency partners. Click on this expression of interest. Same thing for ESCOs, owners reps, lighting contractors, anybody that really wants to be a part of this, you can join in various different ways. Next slide. All right, that is it. Thank you for sitting through this. I guess it's a long session, a lot of information. We know they're information packed, but we try to basically get as much information as we can out there. And I'm more than willing to help with any follow-up that you may like. Dub, Phil, any last words you have?
I'd just like to say, Phil, to you and to EVO, thanks so much for being part of this. Such great information, great resource. Judging from the list of folks that had registered in advance, there's probably a decent level of familiarity with IPMVP and EVO, but it's always good to hear this and have this information reinforced. So appreciate your time and EVO's support and commitment. As we mentioned at the outset, a recording of this will be posted on the ESC website. Slides with the live links that Chris referenced throughout will be sent to you, so you can click through those resources later. And if you need to reach Chris, there's his email, and don't hesitate. And again, appreciate everyone's time this afternoon, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
All right, take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.